Good morning, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm going to give all of you a forewarning in that today I am throwing at you the kitchen sink. We are going to be talking about the tropics. We are going to be talking about, specifically with the tropics, the latest with Tropical Storm Debby, as well as what the rest of the season's going to look like, both here in the short and the long term. More of an emphasis on the short term. And then the second half of our conversation today is going to be touching on something we haven't really talked about, I feel, in quite a while, and that is the temperature trends going forward, talking about some of our HDD, CDDs over the next couple of weeks for the lower 48. And towards the end, you're going to want to stick around because I will have for you a sneak preview of one of the many products that we're working on as part of our collective effort here at Energy Rogue to create a weather platform geared for energy, nat gas, as well as agricultural needs. So, with that being said, let's dive into things, and we're going to start first with this. This is a product I've never shown before here on the channel, but this is called CocoRoss. This is a wonderful product because it is essentially a collective, a collection of volunteers that have rain gauges all over the United States. Now, these can be your makeshift $300 weather stations that people throw in their backyard. They can be at police stations. They're really just an amalgam of different spots for these weather stations, but they serve such a great purpose in that it shows us in situ observational data of what's happening with respect to a certain peril. In this case, when we're looking at Tropical Storm Debby, especially for the Carolinas, our main focus over the last several days has been the flooding threat for the coastal Carolinas and even back towards Savannah and northern Florida. And so what this does is it actually takes into account the day, so you can pick which day you want to look at, and then it's going to actually tell you what the total precipitation was from that day. For example, if we just look at here at the last 24 hours, we see several, actually quite a few stations reporting north of a foot of rainfall across essentially the Hilton Head area. We're also talking about near Charleston and Savannah. We're seeing clearly, look at 10.88, 12.25, 10.86 inches of rain, even up towards 13 inches more inland towards Colleton, South Carolina. So when you see all these stations reporting very high values, it certainly isn't somebody that forgot to clean up their water station or clean out their rain gauge. This is clearly consistent data that we're seeing of some pretty intense rainfall across the coastal Carolinas this morning. And by the way, we're not done. This is expected to continue to increase, and for some localities, we could see close to 20 inches, if not 2 feet of rainfall once this is all said and done. So a very historic event nonetheless, and unfortunately, we have had quite a few people perish because of this, and you're probably might be surprised by that statistic. I think it's now up to 6 or 7 people that have passed. Don't quote me on that, but it actually is quite a few people that have passed away from this system. Many of those are from flooding. People driving into flooded roadways, people drowning due to flooding. So flooding is if not the deadliest calamity out of all of them. It does kill. It's pretty lethal. So, we always say in meteorology, turn around, don't drown. You probably hear that message a lot from NOAA, and it is certainly no different here. And also, you have to keep in mind, too, these areas, for many of them, we didn't really have as much people evacuate as you might see for a major hurricane. So you have a lot of folks that are letting their guard down in the Carolinas. They say, oh, it's just a tropical storm, no big deal. But you have to look at what this storm is doing. As we've talked about the last week, don't be so hung up on the strength of the winds, or don't be so hung up on the storm surge. You have to take into account the severity and the duration of this system. It may not be severe by definition, but the fact that it's slowed down and it essentially is stalling right now, that pretty much says it all. And if you take a look here at our latest GOES 16 radar overlay, you can see that this system is still sitting over South Carolina and ever so slightly creeping up into North Carolina this morning. This system is slowing down as we predicted, and the reason for that, just as a reminder, if we take a look here at our jet stream map, is because of that high pressure out west. Let me switch this over to pink here. High pressure out west in the Four Corners states, that is displacing your jet stream and forcing it to ride over top of that high pressure. Comes crashing down into the southeast United States, bringing showers and thunderstorms for the northeast and the Midwest. But with relation to this system, it keeps it closer to shore, but then you also have high pressure out towards the Bermuda vicinity, and that's helping to essentially lodge this system and keep it around the coastline for longer than what's typical for these kinds of systems. So flooding is certainly the number one concern here. It remains to be the number one concern. We have already seen significant flash flooding along the coastlines. We also have some coastal flooding going on. And so you have a lot of folks that have let their guard down. They think it's not a big deal, but because you have more people out on the road, because you have more people that aren't taking this seriously, that unfortunately is leading to loss of life because of the fact that people may look at this storm and downplay it. But what they don't realize, and what we've talked about here, is that it's not the system strength that we're so focused on. It's the fact that it's almost nearly stationary and is expected to do so here over the course of the next 24 hours. But for the rest of the country, as I sort of alluded to, again, high pressure continues out in the Four Corners states. That is keeping our hot temperatures prolonged for the Four Corners states, for the South Central United States, from Kansas all the way down back to Texas. And of course, that heat also extends as far north as Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, and even back up towards the Central Valley of California. Meanwhile, our cooler temperatures, and I'm going to say cooler, I'm not going to say cold. We got to be kind of careful with that, right? There is a difference between the two. Some cooler temperatures really corresponding to where our jet flow is cutting across. And this pattern that we've been looking at here has been mostly fluctuating, right? We've seen this high pressure expand over the last couple of weeks as far north as the Midwest, even parts of the Northeast, but now we've seen it contract and expand and contract. We've seen this kind of accordion effect taking place with our air masses, and that's led to some temperature fluctuation for the northern half of the lower 48 for places like the Midwest, upper Midwest, and the Pacific Northwest. But that also extends into the Northeast as well. We've seen some fluctuating temperatures and quite a bit of rainfall for the New England and Northeast regions. We're once again expecting some additional showers and thunderstorms later on today, and that may extend into the next couple of days as this system, what is left of Tropical Storm Debby, is forecasted to actually move north into New Jersey and the New York City metropolitan areas. And once again, we're not talking about a hurricane. We may not even be talking necessarily about a tropical storm per se, but it still presents the risk of flooding. So let's take a look at that here on the latest track with Tropical Storm Debby. And this, of course, is what's left of it, as we just saw. You can tell that we are certainly not seeing a hurricane. We have a lot of openness here. It looks more like an open wave, but we are definitely still seeing convection being kicked up on the eastern flank of the system. Still, of course, bringing some precipitation. But if we look here at our latest ensemble blend, this is taking into account both the global and the hurricane models. We have this really, once again, stalling out here of the Carolinas, continuing to do so over really the next couple of days. And then as we get towards late this week into the weekend, we have pretty high confidence that the system's going to move somewhere within the vicinity of the Northeast and New England. Now, as I mentioned, we are not anticipating this becoming a hurricane. Very, very low probability of even seeing that. This system is going to be moving over some pretty rough terrain as it starts to interact with the Appalachians, and then it's going to eventually get kicked out just off the coast of New Jersey, somewhere within this vicinity of the spread between, say, New Jersey and the Long Island region. And as it does so, it is likely to bring some further flooding concerns for areas downstream of this system. And so we can take a look here at a couple of the models just to show you and underscore some of the precipitation. Before I do so, let's start first in looking at the GFS and showing its actual track. You see that it stalls, it sort of meanders around South Carolina and Georgia before it then moves off towards the north, essentially gets intercepted by that jet flow we talked about, and brings some tropical moisture all the way up to New York, Pennsylvania, even as far north as Boston, and getting up towards Bangor. We could be seeing certainly some flooding concerns. And if we took the GFS at face value, we looked at the total accumulated precip for this particular system, the GFS does show upwards of about 2 to 5 inches of rainfall, and even locally higher amounts possible. That is certainly the case. We could see some flash flooding further north, so you want to keep tabs on that. For those folks that live in the Northeast and New England, flash flooding could certainly be an issue, especially with these other rounds of showers and thunderstorms that move in before it that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of days. So flooding remains a concern, not just for the Carolinas, but also as far north as our really large metropolitan areas that make up the Northeast and New England. And that period would take us into what would be later on this week, into the weekend. And general precipitation, I know this is the GFS. Keep in mind one thing. The GFS, because of its spatial scale, will actually sometimes underdo precipitation, right? So these amounts that it shows, so right now it's kicking out about 2 to 5, it's likely to be even higher than that. We will certainly see locally higher amounts in some spots. We could, in some cases, be approaching close to either a half of a foot or, in an extreme case, a foot of rainfall as far north as these regions that we've outlined. So I want to just, let you know of that. Don't think of this as the silver bullet in weather modeling. The GFS really serves the purpose of sort of general trends and general weather pattern trends. What it does not, and what is not meant to resolve, is total precipitation. Many times, because of its resolution and because of what it's trying to resolve, the GFS model will tend to underdo precipitation in order to compensate for giving you the big picture. So if you have any questions on that and you want to dive into the world of weather modeling, I'm happy to dissect that for you and get a little bit more granular than that. But for the sake of today's conversation, we'll leave that at that and put a bookmark in it. So that is the GFS rendition. We can also here just look at the European as well, and you'll notice a similar trend as we get towards the end of the week. You begin to see those precipitation totals begin to rise in those areas that we talked about in the Northeast New England, and also highlighting additional precipitation for the Carolinas. And like I said, there will be some spots in the coastal Carolinas and even as far south as Savannah, Georgia, that could see close to about 20 inches of rainfall once this is all said and done. So that concludes the conversation, at least with Tropical Storm Debbie. As I shut my door, you can tell this is improv. That really concludes everything with Tropical Storm Debbie, but that's not the only thing that we have to be concerned about. If we turn our attention back towards the Atlantic, and really even the Caribbean, let's actually go ahead and go back to that, and we will turn on a couple of overlays. Let's look at IR, upper level, let's see, shortwave, long wave, there we go. And we will change our sector over to this area. Cool. All right. So as I talked about, one of the main points of contention that we've discussed is over the last few weeks, we've really highlighted the Saharan dust across the Saharas. And that has really kept the Atlantic at bay for the most part. But climatologically speaking, Saharan dust only lasts till about middle of August. So we are not done. And also keep in mind, as we transition into a La Nina pattern, climatologically speaking, that is much more favorable for additional tropical development. So I certainly want to emphasize a point that I've been emphasizing here the last few videos, and that is, don't let your guard down. Don't think that this season is done and over with. We are not finished. We are just getting started with peak hurricane season, and conditions over time will become more favorable for the development. For example, one area that we haven't touched on as much is actually down in this pocket up towards the Panama Canal. Now, we did highlight this region a couple videos ago with regards to the Pacific region when we were talking about tropical development. While the Atlantic Basin has been pretty quiet, there have been other regions that have been very active. Look no further than the Pacific, which you can kind of see, kind of not. But there is, we have hurricanes out in the Pacific, out towards western Mexico off the coast. That is mostly just fish storms affecting, really shipping lanes, not so much in the way of land interaction. But most of our activity is out in this vicinity because a lot of our trade winds have interacted with land, those have increased, and also our convection has picked up towards the Pacific. That is not dealing with wind shear, it's not dealing with any of the Sahara dust influence. It's way further displaced from that, so a much more favorable environment. But let this serve as an example for what could come in the Atlantic. As I revert back here to the Panama Canal and even down towards the Caribbean, this is an area that some of the models are projecting for activity to pick up here in the next couple of weeks. Some of them are actually even going as far as saying there would be an impact from a system that develops out in the Caribbean, moves further north, and hits somewhere in the Gulf. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much on that scenario because it is way too far out to be making assumptions on these things. But I think the main focus here, and something that I want to make you all aware of, is that models are being receptive to these changes we're observing right now with our current pattern. We are starting to see some signals on our model guidance that is showing activity picking up in the next couple of weeks. This is something that we've been expecting to happen, and the models are following suit with that assumption. So if we take a look, for example, here at the GFS, I don't know if the GFS is picking up on this still, but we're going to go ahead and move this forward in time. You actually have, by the way, 2 hurricanes that form off in the Eastern Pacific. This, I got to tell you this motion you see here, these hurricanes circling around each other, that's called the Fujiwara effect. I welcome you guys to look into that. It's a wonderful concept. It's a very fascinating thing when it happens. We'll see if it does, but essentially when 2 low pressures form next to each other, they can actually create their own rotation and rotate around each other relative to the storm. So it's a pretty cool thing to happen. We'll see if that does in fact take shape here. Pretty high model confidence in that scenario. But meanwhile, turn your attention and keep your eyes on the Caribbean as well as closer down to the Yucatan. Let's see if the GFS is still picking up on activity. Clearly it is, right? We see a lot more convective activity beginning to wake up towards the Caribbean, out towards essentially Cancun and off the coast of Cancun. And that's a good sign. I mean, if you are essentially looking for the hurricane season to wake up, or if you are somebody that made a crazy prediction about well above average hurricane season, well, here you go. I mean, you have activity picking up in the Caribbean according to the GFS. And at least as far as this run is concerned, this time around, it does not show a system hitting the Gulf, which is kind of interesting because before it was, and now that solution has gone away. But what is important to note is that all of this activity that has been mostly absent in the Caribbean, as well as the Atlantic Basin, begins to wake up here over the next couple of weeks. So even though the models are not showing anything right now, do not let your guard down. The fact that we're seeing some pretty strong model guidance from our suite of weather models that are essentially hinting at activity picking up, which would also align with our Sahara dust climatology as well as our overall hurricane climatology. A lot of things are coming together for a more active pattern in the Atlantic Basin especially, and even up towards the Caribbean over the next couple of weeks. Any one of these bands of convection at any time can form a tropical storm, even if the model does not show it. So we'll have to pay attention very closely to this over these next couple of weeks. And as we always do, we will keep you posted on the tropics here long term. So lastly, let's talk about something that, as I mentioned at the top of the video, we have been kind of neglecting here over the last week, and that is our temperature conversation. Now, before I dive into that, I want to give you guys a preview of the product that myself, Bill, and Brian have been working on here at Energy Rogue, essentially called Weather Rogue or WX Rogue. This is one of what will be many products that will be available for folks that are in nat gas energy, whether that be commodity trading or commercial enterprise, as well as agricultural trading and commercial enterprise. These products are meant to be served for you. They are weather products, but they are geared towards energy, nat gas, as well as agriculture. Take, for example, this product that we have here. This is population-weighted degree days by EIA region, and this is using the GFS model. Now, before I dive into this, let me just give some context. What I want each and every one of you to know is, as you just saw when we talked briefly about the GFS model with respect to precipitation, there is no such thing as a silver bullet in meteorology. Just like there is no such thing as a silver bullet in trading, right? There is no one-stop solution that will give you 100% accuracy. It just will not happen. So why I say that is because I'm showing you the GFS as an example. There will be multiple other weather models that are corresponding with this product, and that is to give you a spread of the data and for us to better understand what the trend is going forward with our temperatures. So one of the things that I want to just make clear now, this is just one of many products. We're not going to be heavily leveraged on one weather model. We are going to be leveraging and utilizing various different weather models for the utilization and the utility that they bring. Every weather model has different biases. Every weather model has its limitations and its pros and cons. But it is important in meteorology to be able to look at those, identify biases, understand the trend, and just get a good spread of where we're going. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. This product in particular is pulling from the GFS, and as I mentioned, it's population weighted. So how this was created, these were grouped by EIA region, and then of course we calculate out those CDD values based upon GFS output. So this is broken down in 4 regions: Pacific, West, South, Central, East, North Central, and South Atlantic. And what's interesting about this is this actually, in the GFS, what's great about it, it can go out as far as 14 days. This takes us, of course, into August the 19th and actually closer to August 20th. So we'll take a look at each region here over the next 7 to 14 days. And this is awesome because you are now getting a sneak peek at one of what will be many products that we'll be offering at WX Rogue. So stay tuned. But this is what we're looking at here. We'll start first with the Pacific. And as you see, GFS and what we've been noticing is sort of a trend, a little bit of a cooling trend with our Pacific region, and then eventually going back up by the time we get to August the 19th. So we see a bit of a cooling trend by the time we get to the 15th of August, and then it spikes up by the time we get to the 19th. So definitely that certainly correlates with a lot of the thinking by our climate models. Now, something that's going to be interesting to watch if we want to talk about climate models is that we are expecting more of a zonal flow across the United States. So remember how I told you at the top of the conversation, upper level ridge, jet rides over top, crashes? Instead, what we're expecting as we transition to a La Nina is more of a fluctuation pattern where rather than we see these peaks and valleys and troughs and ridges, instead of that, we see more of this kind of zonal flow, right? And zonal flow would even look something more like this. And because of that, cutting across the lower 48, we might see some cooler conditions for many as we get into September and October. So certainly watch that space. But at least in the short term, the Pacific will stay warm. Really, the warmest region of them all is going to be the West South Central. We talked about at the top of the conversation, the 4 corner states, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, even down towards Louisiana, as being under that dome of high pressure. Well, certainly the GFS is picking up on that, and our CDDs are correlating with that. We'll have the highest cooling degree days by population weight for the South Central United States. And if we go farther out to the 18th, the GFS is very bullish on that heat, taking us up to potentially 22 cooling degree days by the time we get to August the 18th for that day. It remains to be seen. One thing about the GFS that's a pro is that it goes out very far. The downside is sometimes it can over-exaggerate your temperatures. That said, with both of those things in mind, both pros and cons, it does go out very far, and it can at least give you an indication on what the general temperature trend will be, especially when we see some major changes. Coolest regions here over the short term are likely going to be the East North Central, which is going to be the lower Great Lakes, the Midwest. That is of no surprise as that jet stream continues to cut across the region. And coming in second, of course, is the Pacific we talked about. The South Atlantic eventually warming up. We're seeing, some cooler temperatures in association with Tropical Storm Debbie, but expect that to rebound, and we kind of increase our temperatures here the long term once that system moves out of the region. So this is a sneak peek of that. Again, this is population weighted degree days by EIA region, pulling from the GFS. Like I said a few times already in this discussion, you can tell I'm excited about it. I know Brian and Bill are as well. That we're going to have a multitude of products that are going to draw some really nice relationships and correlations with respect to weather and its effect on natural gas energy as well as agriculture. So stay tuned for that. We'll be announcing more here later on this month on what else will be coming with it and sort of what this all entails. But definitely stay tuned. So just to summarize, the general short trend here is that we will likely see our warmest temperatures being out in the west coast of the United States, particularly the southwest and the south central United States, while our cooler temperatures are going to be residing in what would be the Midwest, or what we call the East North Central and EIA regions, as well as the Northeast. Listen, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to post those down in the comments below here on the YouTube channel, as well as our Discord channel on Energy Rogue. I almost said Weather Rogue, but that is our channel. So feel free to ask me any questions in the meantime. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back here on Thursday with another weather discussion. Take care.